Hi, I'm Lena Rivers, and I'm 23 now. But this story, it begins 15 years ago, on the night I stopped being a child. I remember the cold. I remember how the air bit at my skin as I wandered the dark streets alone. But more than anything, I remember the sound of the door slamming shut behind me. The sound of my mother's voice, sharp and unforgiving. The silence from my father, and the feeling like I had been erased. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a house that looked like it belonged in a glossy real estate magazine, modern, spotless, staged for people who pretended to love each other. My parents, Mitchell and Vanessa Rivers, were successful criminal defense attorneys. Picture two people in suits, constantly on the phone, never smiling unless it was for a photo op. That was them. That was family. My younger brother Ezra was their pride, their trophy. He had the sharp tongue, the perfect grades, the magnetic charm. People adored him instantly. And me? I was there, a shadow, a placeholder in the family photo. I wasn't stupid. I knew early on that I was different. I colored outside the lines literally and figuratively. I liked drawing, storytelling, asking questions. My parents didn't appreciate creative nonsense. They preferred results, numbers, medals, straight A's. If I brought home anything less than perfection, the disappointment hit like a silent bomb. No yelling, just that look. Ezra would get praised for solving a math problem. I'd get punished for asking why the problem mattered. But I still tried. God, I tried. I thought if I worked harder, stayed quiet, got better, maybe then they'd see me. Maybe then they'd care. Then came that day. I was 8. We had a math test in school that week, and I'd stayed up night after night going over flashcards, whispering formulas to myself in bed, skipping recess just to review. I needed to get it right, to prove something. When the paper came back with a big red C, my heart sank. Not just because it was a bad grade, but because I knew what it meant when I got home. I stepped into the house, shoes still wet from the drizzle, clutching the paper like it was a confession. I could hear them in the living room. "She's hopeless," my mom snapped, her voice cold and brittle. "We pour everything into her and get this. She's not cut out for anything important," my dad replied flatly. Maybe it's time to stop wasting energy. I stood in the hallway, frozen. I should have been used to it by then, the whispered judgments, the empty stares. But this felt final, like a verdict had been reached. That night, after dinner, they called me into the living room. Dad was sitting, legs crossed, scrolling on his phone. Mom stood, arms folded, eyes hard. "Lena," she said like she was addressing a client, "we've decided something." I blinked. "What?" "You're not meeting the standards we expect," Dad said, not looking up. "We think it's time for you to leave." I laughed. I thought it was a joke, an awful one. But Mom didn't laugh. Instead, she took a step forward and said it again, slower. "You're not part of this family anymore." I shook my head. "You can't mean that. I'll do better, I promise. I can study harder." And that's when it happened. She hit me, hard, right across the face. No hesitation, no warning. My vision blurred. I stumbled back, my cheek burned. It felt like my whole world cracked. I turned to Dad. He didn't flinch, didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. I realized then I wasn't their daughter. Not really. I never had been. Still, I packed a tiny bag. My fingers trembled as I folded clothes. I was a child, trying to act like I had somewhere to go, like I had options. I took a sketchbook, a pair of socks, and the jacket I'd grown out of. I stared around my room, the room I thought was mine, and saw it for what it was, temporary, hollow. At the door, Mom was waiting. She opened it without a word. The night swallowed me whole. I walked aimlessly under flickering streetlights, clutching my bag like it held my whole life. My cheek throbbed. My heart felt shredded. The cold seeped through my socks, my bones. I was too afraid to cry, too proud to scream, too young to know what to do. It had been hours. My legs ached. My stomach growled. I was ready to collapse near a bus stop when I heard it. "Lena?" I froze. That voice, that familiar, urgent voice. It was Aunt Morgan. I turned around, and there she was, coat flapping, eyes wide with concern. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She and my mom had fought about something I never understood, but I remembered her warmth, her laugh, her cooking. She rushed to me, pulled me into the kind of hug I didn't know I needed. "Sweetheart, what happened? What are you doing out here?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that I'd just been erased from my own family? Then I broke. I sobbed into her coat, her scarf, her shoulder. Ugly, shaking sobs. She didn't ask questions. She just held me. Eventually, we walked together, her arm around me, guiding me through the dark. She didn't need explanations. Not yet. She just needed me safe. When we got to her apartment, a warm, cluttered haven of plants, books, and soft lighting, she handed me tea, wrapped me in blankets, and sat beside me until I could breathe again. That night, I didn't sleep in fear. I slept because I was finally somewhere I belonged. Not in a house of trophies, in a home. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't know where I was. For a few seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling, disoriented. The room was small, but warm, with fairy lights hanging above the bed and the scent of lavender in the air. It didn't take long for it all to come back: the cold night, the streetlight, the sting on my cheek, and Aunt Morgan. I sat up slowly, my body sore from walking for hours, but for once, the tight knot of fear I usually woke up with was gone. No yelling, no tension in the air, just the sound of someone humming softly in the kitchen. Morgan. She greeted me with a warm smile and a plate of scrambled eggs. Nothing fancy, just real food, made with care. She didn't ask questions right away. Instead, she handed me a fork and sat across from me. "I'm glad you're here, kid," she said. I blinked. "You are?" "Of course," she replied, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Your family. And more importantly, you're a good kid who deserves love. That's not negotiable." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Not my parents, not even teachers. I just nodded, focusing on my food so she wouldn't see the tears welling up again. After breakfast, she finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "What happened?" It took me a long moment. I stared down at the table, tracing a knot in the wood with my thumb. "They told me to leave," I said quietly. Said I wasn't good enough, that they were tired of trying. Morgan's face didn't move at first, but her jaw tightened. I could see it in her eyes: anger, disbelief, heartbreak all rolled into one. "And your mom?" She hit me. Morgan stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She paced the room once, then stopped to take a deep breath, steadying herself. "You're staying here," she said firmly. "As long as you need. No one throws out my niece like trash and gets to pretend it didn't happen." I felt something shift in me. Like for the first time in my life, I had someone in my corner. That week changed everything. She called the school, explained the situation, and helped me transfer to a new district. I didn't have many clothes or school supplies, but she didn't make a big deal out of it. She just took me shopping, nothing extravagant, just basics, and let me pick what I liked. Not what made me look presentable or perfect, what felt like me. She gave me space when I needed it, and sat beside me when I couldn't be alone. And slowly, I started to heal. But healing isn't a straight line, and letting go of pain is harder than people think. Some nights, I'd still wake up from nightmares, my mom's voice yelling in my ear, the sound of the door slamming, the cold. I'd lie there, paralyzed, my chest tight, wondering if any of this was real, wondering if they were going to come looking for me, if they even noticed I was gone. But Morgan always seemed to know when something was wrong. She'd knock on my door, crack it open just a bit, and ask, "Want some hot cocoa?" Always cocoa, always warm, and always followed by her sitting across from me. No pressure to talk, just there. It wasn't therapy, but it helped. She helped me find pieces of myself I didn't know existed. I started drawing again. She let me cover the back wall of the apartment with my sketches. Some were good, some were just scribbles. But she called them windows into your mind and treated each one like it was a masterpiece. For the first time, I wasn't scared to be myself. Eventually, we had to talk about the legal side of things. Morgan consulted a friend, a social worker, who helped start the process of officially getting custody of me. It wasn't easy. My parents tried to block it, claiming I ran away and was troubled. But Morgan didn't back down. She hired a lawyer, got statements from my teachers about the emotional abuse, and insisted on a formal investigation. That investigation was rough. I had to talk to strangers about things I had buried so deep I didn't even have the words for them. But Morgan was there every step of the way. She told me I didn't owe anyone my pain, but if I was ready to fight for a better future, she'd stand beside me. So I did, and by the end of it, the court ruled in her favor. Morgan became my legal guardian. She cried when the papers were signed. Real, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind a tissue. I didn't say anything. I just hugged her. I was only 9. But I knew what that moment meant. I wasn't going back. My parents never called, never wrote, never asked. Not once. It should have hurt more than it did. But honestly, it felt like closure. Morgan enrolled me in a new art program at school, and I finally got to be around people who didn't think drawing was a waste of time. I met teachers who encouraged my weird ideas, classmates who shared snacks at lunch, and for the first time I started to feel like I belonged somewhere. But one person always lingered in the back of my mind. Ezra, my little brother. He was only 6 when I left. Too young to understand what was happening. Too sheltered to see the cracks. I thought about him constantly, wondered if he missed me. If he even remembered me. I used to draw him from memory, sketching his face with the big eyes and mop of brown curls. I never blamed him. Not once. He was caught in the same machine, molded into the perfect child, too scared to be anything else. Years passed, and with every passing birthday, the pain faded just a little more. I learned to laugh. I learned to breathe. I stopped asking why my parents didn't love me and started asking why I ever thought their love was worth chasing in the first place. I started writing stories, 2 fictional ones at first, filled with magic and monsters and heroes who always found their way home. Then slowly they turned into something more real, honest, personal. Morgan read every single one. "You've got a gift, Lena," she said one evening, sipping her tea. "You could help people one day, kids like you." I looked up from my notebook. How? By telling your story. By showing them that pain doesn't have to be the end. That sometimes it's the beginning of something better. At the time, I didn't know what she meant, but it stuck with me. Everything she said stuck with me. By the time I was 16, I had built something I never thought I'd have a life. A real one. With friends, hobbies, good grades, and plans for college. I had dreams. Not ones given to me, but ones I chose. Still, some ghosts are hard to bury. And one cold January evening, as I was studying in the living room, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Ezra. I stared at it, frozen, hands trembling. I hadn't heard from him in over 7 years. And now, suddenly, he was reaching out. I hesitated. My heart pounded. Was this a trap? A prank? Did they even let him contact me? I opened the message. "Lena, please, can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. Ezra's message stared at me from the screen like it had weight. Heavy, quiet, waiting. I read it again. "Lena, please, can we talk?" I hadn't seen that name pop up on my phone since I was a child. For years, I wondered if he even remembered me, if I was just a ghost in his story. I had imagined reaching out so many times, but now that it was him, I froze. I sat there on the couch, wrapped in Morgan's soft green blanket, hands slightly shaking. Outside, the wind rattled against the window panes. Inside, the silence pressed in on me like a held breath. I wanted to ask, why now? But instead, I typed, "Yeah, we can talk." His reply came within seconds. "Can we meet? I don't want to do this over text." There it was again, that urgency, a tone I wasn't used to hearing from him. Ezra had always been calm, polished, put together, the golden child, the one who never got in trouble, who always had a comeback. This didn't feel like him. I told him to meet me at a small coffee shop near Morgan's place. Neutral ground, public, safe, he agreed. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a storm. What if this was a setup? What if my parents sent him to guilt trip me back into their world? Or worse, what if I saw him and all the old pain came crashing back in ways I wasn't ready for? But beneath the fear, there was something else. Hope. Stupid, soft, persistent hope. The next day, I sat in a coffee shop, a mug of chamomile tea growing cold between my hands. The place was quiet, dim lighting, jazz music playing low, students typing away on laptops. I watched the door, heart thudding like a drum inside my chest. Then I saw him. Ezra. He looked older, of course. Taller, leaner. His face had sharpened, but his eyes, they were the same. Wide, searching, nervous. Our eyes met. He walked slowly toward me, clutching his jacket like a shield. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Hey," I replied cautiously. He sat down across from me, then immediately looked down, fingers fidgeting with the zipper on his sleeve. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence between us felt loud, filled with years of things unsaid. Finally, he exhaled. I didn't know where to start. Start anywhere, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He nodded, then looked up, eyes glassy. I didn't know what they did to you until it was too late. I blinked. Ezra, they didn't exactly hide it. No, he said quickly. But I was 6. They kept me sheltered, shielded. They told me you ran away, that you didn't want to be part of the family anymore. My stomach turned. And I believed them, he added, voice breaking. For years I hated you for it. I thought you abandoned me. His words hit like cold water. I'd imagined a lot of outcomes. But hearing him say he hated me, even if it wasn't his fault, cut deep. Why now? I asked quietly. Why reach out after all this time? Ezra leaned back, his jaw clenched. Because now I know the truth. And I think I'm next. I frowned. What do you mean? He laughed bitterly. I started pushing back. I told them I didn't want to go to law school, that I wanted to study music. Write. Create. They flipped. Said I was wasting my potential. That I was just trained to be like you. I felt a jolt at that. They're suffocating me, Lena, he continued. And I don't know how much longer I can take it. I stayed quiet, letting his words settle. I watched the way his hands shook, how his shoulders sagged like he was carrying something too heavy. I knew that weight. You don't have to stay with them, I said softly. You don't owe them your life. I don't have anywhere else to go, he whispered. They pay for everything. School, our rent. I've been too scared to walk away. His eyes met mine. But you did. You got out. And I was hoping, maybe, you could help me do the same. There it was. The question he was too afraid to ask directly. The reason he came. I sat back in my chair, heart hammering. I could hear Morgan's voice in my head already. Be careful. Protect your peace. But I also saw the little boy who used to sneak snacks into my room when I was grounded for getting a B. The brother who once cried when I scraped my knee and blamed himself. That version of him had never left me. You can stay with me, I said before I could second-guess myself. Ezra blinked. Really? I nodded. I can't promise everything will be perfect, but I won't let them crush you the way they tried to crush me. He smiled for the first time. A small, grateful smile. Thank you, he said, voice tight. 3 days later, he showed up outside Morgan's apartment with a single duffel bag and a bruised look in his eyes. Morgan opened the door, arms crossed. You sure about this? She asked me under her breath. I nodded. Yeah. She looked Ezra up and down, then stepped aside. Come in. And just like that, he was part of our world. At first, he was quiet, wary. The walls he'd built to survive in that house didn't crumble overnight, but slowly, cracks began to show. He'd sit on the balcony in the evenings with my sketchbook, flipping through pages in silence. Sometimes he'd hum while doing it. Other times, he'd pull out his guitar and play until his fingers hurt. He never said much, but I saw it in his eyes, the beginning of something changing. One night, as I passed his room, I heard him crying. I didn't go in. I just waited outside the door, sitting with my back to the wall until the sobs faded. The next morning, he didn't bring it up, but he smiled when I passed him the cereal box, like he knew I'd been there, like it mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the past alone. But I also knew this peace wouldn't last forever, because when people like our parents lose control, they don't go quietly. They make noise. They fight back. They burn whatever they can't own. Ezra settled in faster than I thought he would. He started cooking breakfast in the mornings, messy pancakes, always a little too crispy on the edges. He cleaned up without being asked, even folded his blankets neatly on the couch when he fell asleep watching old movies with Morgan and me. He didn't say much about our parents. Not at first, but I could see it in him, the slow thaw of someone who'd spent years frozen in survival mode. His hands stopped shaking. His laugh came back. It wasn't loud, but it was real. And still, the air felt like it was holding its breath, because we knew it wasn't over. Our parents didn't call when he left, but they weren't going to stay quiet forever. Not Mitchell and Vanessa Rivers. Losing control wasn't in their vocabulary. It happened one Thursday afternoon. I was finishing a project on my laptop when Morgan stepped into my room, phone in hand, eyebrows knit together. It's for you, she said. Your mother. My stomach flipped. I took the phone with hesitation, pressing it to my ear like it might bite. Lena, my mother said, her voice clipped and businesslike. We need to talk. I didn't respond. I assume you know your brother has left home. He's safe, I said. and free. That's all you need to know. She exhaled sharply, like I was a stubborn client. This isn't a game, Lena. You're dragging him into your rebellion. You don't know what you're doing. I'm not dragging anyone, I replied. He made his own choice. You're corrupting him. That word, corrupting, like love and freedom were toxins. No, I said slowly. I'm giving him what you never gave either of us, a choice. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, colder now. You're going to regret this. She hung up. No yelling, no threats, just that promise. That threat dressed as certainty. I didn't tell Ezra about the call until the next day. He was in the living room, strumming his guitar, writing lyrics into a beat-up notebook he'd found in one of Morgan's drawers. His hair was messy, and his socks didn't match, but he looked more alive than I'd ever seen him. I sat beside him, arms crossed over my knees. They called, I said quietly. He stopped playing, eyes flicking to mine. What did they say? That you'd regret this. That I was corrupting you. He let out a bitter laugh. Of course. Because we're only valuable when we're doing what they want. He set the guitar down. Do you regret it? I didn't even have to think. Not for a second. Neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't need to. The thing about growing up in silence is that you learn to read everything between the lines, the glances, the long pauses, the weight behind certain words, and the ones left unspoken. We didn't hear anything for a few weeks. No texts, no emails, no knocks at the door. But then came the letter. It arrived in a heavy envelope. No return address, just our last name on the front in all caps. Rivers. Morgan opened it first. Her face tightened as she read. It's a cease and desist, she said. Ezra and I exchanged looks. For what? They're accusing you, she said, eyes flicking to me, of coercion. Saying you manipulated Ezra into abandoning his education and responsibilities. I felt my heart clench, but Morgan wasn't done. They're also threatening legal action to regain custody, Ezra scoffed. I'm 18. They can't. They're saying you're mentally unfit, she said, her voice calm but firm. That Lena is exploiting your instability. I sat back, stunned. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow I was. They're trying to discredit you, Morgan continued. Both of you. Paint you as unstable, dangerous, incapable. It was classic. When they couldn't control the story, they tried to rewrite it, erase the pain they caused, turn us into the villains. Ezra stood, pacing. I knew they'd come after me. I just didn't think they'd stoop this low. You don't have to fight them alone, I said. He looked at me, eyes burning. I'm done being afraid of them. That night, we sat around the dining table, me, Ezra, and Morgan, figuring out our next steps. It felt like war prep, but this wasn't revenge. This was protection. Morgan's lawyer friend, Denise, agreed to help. She filed an immediate response, highlighting Ezra's age, the lack of legal grounds for custody, and our parents' history of emotional abuse. Then came the public part. We weren't planning to go viral. We just wanted to be heard. Ezra posted a video. He didn't name names. He didn't rant. He just spoke plainly, from the heart. He talked about growing up in a house where perfection was currency and individuality was punished. He talked about his sister being thrown away for being different. He talked about how he found freedom by choosing to walk away from that world. The video spread faster than any of us expected. People commented. People shared their stories. People believed him. And suddenly, the Rivers' reputation, once pristine, once untouchable, began to crack. Because the truth is, our story wasn't rare. It was just hidden. And now, it wasn't anymore. The next morning, we woke up to news alerts. Someone had leaked internal emails from our parents' firm, ones that painted them as more concerned about image than ethics. It wasn't Ezra. It wasn't me. But the timing was poetic. By the end of the week, their firm released a statement about internal restructuring. By the end of the month, Vanessa was placed on indefinite leave. Mitchell stepped down completely. Ezra and I watched the news reports in stunned silence. We didn't celebrate. There were no victory dances or champagne toasts. Just a quiet understanding. This wasn't revenge. This was release. We were no longer hiding under their shadow. We had stepped into the light and they couldn't dim it anymore. A few nights later, I found Ezra on the balcony again. He was barefoot, guitar resting across his lap, head tilted back as he looked at the stars. Do you think they'll ever understand? He asked softly. I leaned against the railing. I used to want that, I admitted, for them to wake up one day and realize how wrong they were. But now, I just want peace. He nodded slowly. Me too. There was a long pause. Then he played a melody I didn't recognize. Gentle, raw, beautiful. What's that? I asked. He smiled. It's called When the Silence Breaks. A few weeks after Ezra's video went viral, something unexpected started happening. Emails.DMs, comments, messages from strangers. Some wrote just a few words, me too. Others shared paragraphs about strict parents, homes that didn't feel like homes, the ache of never being enough. They weren't just talking to Ezra. They were talking to me, too. Kids, adults, people who had walked away from family, or were thinking about it but too scared. Some had stories so familiar it made my chest tighten. Ezra and I started reading them together at night, side by side on the couch. Sometimes we'd laugh at the weird similarities. Other times we'd go completely quiet, just sitting there with our thoughts. I didn't know so many people felt like this, he said one night, scrolling through a message from a girl who said her dad still called her the family failure. I nodded. Neither did I. That silence, the one we grew up in, it wasn't just in our house. It was everywhere. Other people were living it, hiding it, surviving it, and they had nowhere to go, nowhere to breathe. Morgan was the one who said it first. We were eating dinner, a lazy Sunday kind of dinner, cheap pizza, lemonade, too many napkins. You know, she said, tearing her crust in half. You two could do something with all this. Ezra raised a brow. Something like, what? Something real, she said. Something that helps people like you. Like those kids who messaged you. A place. A space. Anything. I looked up from my plate. A center? I said, voice tentative. Like a community space? Morgan nodded. Why not? I didn't answer right away. Neither did Ezra. But the idea settled in the air like seeds waiting to root. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the nights I spent wondering where to go. All the tears I swallowed so I wouldn't be called dramatic. All the kids who had messaged us asking, how did you survive? And suddenly, I didn't just want to tell them how. I wanted to give them a place to do it too. We started planning the next day. We called it The Branch. A place for kids and teens who felt like they'd been cut off, disconnected from their families, or from safety, or from love. The name came from something Morgan used to say to me when I first moved in. You're not broken, Lena. You're just a branch growing in a different direction. The phrase stuck with me. And now it had a home. We didn't have much money, but we had enough for a small space, a rented room inside a larger community center. We painted the walls ourselves, put up shelves, brought in bean bags and blankets and books. Ezra donated his old guitar and set up a little music corner. I filled a cabinet with sketchbooks and pencils. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was open. The first few weeks were slow. A few kids trickled in, mostly quiet, unsure. Some came just to sit. Others wandered in during tutoring sessions and stayed for the music workshops Ezra started leading on Saturdays. There was one girl, Mia, who didn't speak for 3 sessions straight. She just sat in the corner, drawing tiny flowers in the margins of old notebooks. But on the 4th week, she walked in and handed me a sketch. It was a tree, but the branches twisted off in every direction, each one holding a different object and eye, a hand, a tear, a smile. Underneath, she'd written in neat print, not every tree grows straight. I still have that sketch. It reminded me why we started. Word spread faster than we expected. Soon we had to expand to 2 rooms, then a 3rd. We started weekend creative workshops, poetry, painting, songwriting. We invited local therapists to give talks on boundaries, healing, self-worth. One day, we brought in a group of volunteers to repaint a dull hallway with a giant mural of birds breaking free from a cage. That wall became everyone's favorite spot. People took pictures in front of it, wrote their names underneath it, drew tiny wings next to their initials. It felt like magic, but it was more than that. It was home. One afternoon, as I was restocking art supplies, Ezra walked in holding his phone like it was on fire. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. I looked up. "What?" He turned the screen to me. Our mom had left a voicemail, the first one in over a year. I took a breath, hit play, and listened. "Ezra, Lena, I hope you're both well. We heard about your center. The branch, is it? That's admirable. We were thinking, maybe it's time we put the past behind us. Perhaps we could meet, have dinner, talk." She paused. "We're proud of what you've done." Click. Ezra's face twisted in disbelief. "Proud?" Now she's proud? I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the phone, thinking about how many times I had begged for those words, and how, now that I finally heard them, they meant nothing. "Are you going to call her back?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," he nodded. "Me neither." And just like that, it was done. There was no more pain in those names, no more longing, just distance, clean, quiet, freedom. A few months later, we held our first open house at the branch. Kids brought their families, the ones they were born into, and the ones they chose. We had a small stage set up, and Ezra performed his first original song in front of a live crowd. He called it Noise of the Unheard. I cried the whole way through. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the front of the room with shaky hands and a heart too full. "I used to think survival was enough," I said, "but it's not. We deserve more than just getting by. We deserve to grow, to create, to speak, to belong." I paused. "And for anyone who's ever been told they were too much or not enough, I hope you know now that you are exactly right, as you are." The room clapped. Some people stood. A few cried. But most of all, they listened. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the floor of the center and looked around. The string lights glowed softly above me. The mural on the wall shimmered in the dim light. Ezra sat beside me, back against the wall. "You know," he said, "if 8-year-old me could see this, he'd think we were superheroes." I smiled. "Maybe we are," he laughed, "except without the capes." "I dunno," I said, leaning back. "Morgan's kind of a superhero in boots." He laughed louder. We stayed like that for a while, just sitting, breathing, remembering. Not the pain, but the journey. The whole messy, beautiful path that brought us here. We had turned silence into sound, loneliness into family, survival into purpose. A year passed, then another, and the branch grew. What started in a rented room with folding chairs and hope turned into a real foundation built from story, sorrow, and second chances. We had a full team now: volunteers, mentors, artists, therapists. People who believed, like we did, that broken doesn't mean ruined, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is who helps you build a future. Morgan still kept her role as honorary queen of the operation. She showed up every Saturday with fresh muffins and a jug of sweet tea, arms full of blankets or books or whatever she found on sale that week. She never asked for recognition. But every kid who walked through that door somehow ended up wrapped in one of her hugs before the month was over. "She's part tree, part storm," Ezra said once, sipping his tea on the back patio. And he was right. She was rooted and wild, the kind of person you leaned on without asking permission. I wouldn't be here without her. Neither would he. We started something new that summer, a retreat program, a weekend getaway for teens who needed space to breathe, far from the chaos of their everyday lives. We found a quiet camp spot outside the city, wooded, peaceful, filled with birdsong and silence that didn't hurt. The first retreat had 12 kids. Some of them hadn't said a word the first 2 days. But by the end of the weekend, they were sitting by the fire, trading secrets, laughing, passing around marshmallows and dreams. One night, a boy named Kalen stood up during our circle and said, "I didn't think I'd make it to 16, but I'm glad I did." Nobody said anything, but we all felt it. Sometimes surviving is the loudest victory there is. One morning, Ezra came into my room with a folded piece of paper in his hand. "You might want to read this," he said, tossing it on my desk. It was a letter from our father. I held it like it was made of glass. "Dear Lena, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I was wrong about everything. I can't undo what we did, but I need you to know I see it now. I see what we lost. I see what we threw away. I see you." He ended it with a line I never expected to read. "I hope you found peace. And I hope one day you can forgive me, even if we never speak again." I set the letter down. Ezra leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said after a long pause. "Actually, yeah, because something had changed. I didn't read that letter hoping it would fix anything. I didn't need it to, but it was proof of something else. They were no longer in control of the story. We were. A few months later, the branch celebrated its 3rd anniversary. We held a block party. We invited every kid who'd ever stepped through our doors. There was music, dancing, food, and chalk drawings stretched across the sidewalk for 2 blocks. Some of the original kids were now volunteers. Some were in college. One girl came back from a year abroad and brought her new partner with her. Another showed up with her mom, someone she'd reconciled with after years of therapy in space. They hugged in front of the mural and cried. That moment didn't feel like a happy ending. It felt like a beginning, a new chapter, one we never thought we'd reach. That night, after the party, Ezra and I sat on the roof. It was a clear night. Stars above us, city noise far below. He leaned back on his elbows. You ever think about what would have happened if they hadn't kicked you out? Sometimes, I admitted, but not with sadness anymore. Just curiosity. Yeah, he said. Same. We sat in silence for a bit, the kind that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels earned. Then he added, I think you were the bravest person in our whole family. You walked away first. I smiled. I wasn't brave, I said. I was just done. He chuckled. Maybe that's the same thing. Before we left that rooftop, we carved something into the old wooden bench up there. Something small, something just for us. Survivor's bloom. We didn't sign it. We didn't need to. Sometimes I still get messages from strangers, from old classmates, from teachers who say, I didn't realize what you were going through. Sometimes I sit with that for a while, the idea that so many people didn't see. But most days, I don't carry anger anymore. There's no space for it. There's too much life happening now. I have a small apartment with sunlight that spills in every morning like it knows me. I keep a plant in every corner. I drink tea I actually like, not the cheap kind, but the stuff with weird herbs that Morgan introduced me to. I still draw, still write, still show up to the branch every week, where I help people find their way back to themselves, one sketch, one story, one breath at a time. I used to think I needed to go back and fix everything. Rewind time, make them see me, make them love me, but now I understand something deeper. I didn't need to be seen by them. I needed to see myself, and now I do, clearly, without apology. If I could go back to that 8-year-old girl standing on the sidewalk with a swollen cheek and a backpack full of shame, I'd tell her, you're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to grow so strong they'll have to squint to recognize you. And one day, you'll build a home out of everything they tried to destroy. And it'll be beautiful. Story 2. I was expelled because Mom sided with my stepfather and his children. They neglected, however, that I am the home's owner. Time to take it back now. As a 35-year-old, I never imagined that my father's careful estate preparation would lead to the dissolution of our family. I want to make sure I'm giving you the complete picture, since there's a lot to process here. I'll begin from the beginning. I work as a senior software architect for a large tech company in Seattle. This type of work was always what my parents wanted me to do. The future lies in technology. When I got admitted into a computer science program, he would shout with pride. He wasn't a techie and ran a successful construction company, but he had an amazing ability to spot patterns. Starting with the late 1980s recession. During some of the most challenging times in the construction industry, Dad built his company from the ground up. Other contractors wouldn't take on the tasks he embarked on. With just his tools and a pickup vehicle, Mom told me they were thrifty and lived in a modest apartment back then. However, Dad had a strong belief in his vision. The important thing is to establish connections, not just buildings, he would often say. He overcame his challenging early years by adopting that style of thinking, even if it meant losing some bids to competitors who made inflated timeline claims. Dad's firm stood out for the way he handled both clients and employees. He firmly believed in honest timetables and transparent pricing. Build trust first. He would give advice. He was right when he predicted that the profits would come. By the mid-1990s, his company had become well known in the Seattle region for taking on complex restoration jobs that required both technical know-how and historical sensitivity. Due to the loyalty he had built up with his employees and clientele. During the 2008 financial crisis, when many construction businesses were failing, Dad's business managed to survive. During that time, he didn't fire a single person. Instead, he took out a second mortgage on his beloved Mustang and cut his personal income to zero. Observing him deal with the problem taught me more about leadership than any management school could have. He informed me that your workers are your extended family. They will take care of your business if you take care of them. At the time, I was unaware of the extent to which his managing style impacted my own career. When I was promoted to team lead at my software company, I implemented several of his suggestions. In the same way that he maintained meticulous project records for each construction site, I created comprehensive documentation methods for our code. His focus on building positive connections enabled me to guide my development team through difficult project deadlines. In my junior year, I met Emily, 34, during a hackathon. While studying business administration, she helped with the event's organizing. She apparently found my love of coding endearing from the moment he lay eyes on me. Despite my lack of energy, sleep deprivation, alcoholism, and probably untidy look, Dad fell in love. After their first breakfast together, he informed me that she grounds you. Don't let this pass you by. Dad even helped Emily start her own marketing company once she graduated from college. He explained his business goals with her, showed her how he structured his contracts, and introduced her to his network of local business owners. Success, he would remind us, is more than simply knowledge. It's about assisting people in their endeavors. Dad was always teaching and sharing his knowledge. Those early years were special. On Sundays, Emily and I would always travel to my parents' place for supper. As Dad ignited the grill, we would all gather on the back deck he had built and talk about everything and nothing. He would ask detailed questions despite his inability to comprehend most of the technical aspects of my most recent work. Mom used to roll her eyes affectionately and remark, "There they go again with the computer talk." The house itself was Dad's pride and pleasure. He bought it with the money he got from his first big building project in the 1990s, a historic restoration project in an older area of Seattle that made his company renowned. He turned the garage into the most orderly workshop you've ever seen, and this charming craftsman-style house has a wraparound porch. Every tool has a designated spot and is arranged with almost obsessive accuracy. Dad treated the house as if it were a real-life demonstration of his abilities. Each refurbishment was carefully planned and documented. He kept an extensive spreadsheet in which he recorded each repair, renovation, and paint job. As he showed me how to check the foundation or clean the gutters, he would add that a home is like a living creature. He kept up a maintenance schedule that encompassed anything from replacing air filters to inspecting the roof following winter storms. When the small things are neglected, they grow into major issues. The workshop was not only his sanctuary, but also a classroom where he taught me about things other than tools. He built a workbench specifically for teaching me carpentry, as well as offering interesting storage choices. He had done all the renovations himself in the garage. According to him, each piece of wood has a unique history. Having distinct forms for each item on the pegboard wall as we worked wasn't just about keeping things organized. It was how he taught me that everything has a function and a place. Our role is to assist in telling that tale. In that garage, weekends were very important to our family. When I was 12, Dad and I would spend hours upon hours working on his 1967 Mustang. Dad had bought it to be restored, saying the effort would improve our relationship as father and son. That car became a classroom for life lessons. He gave me simple counsel that I still follow today. Use the appropriate tool for the job at all times. Shortcuts may seem alluring, but they will ultimately cost you money. If Dad had wanted to, he could have finished the Mustang project in a year, but it took 3. But the journey was more interesting to him than the goal. He taught me everything from basic mechanics to project management. Every component we altered was photographed. Every step was documented, and comprehensive development logs were kept. He would say, "This isn't just about fixing a car. It involves learning how to divide complex issues into smaller, more manageable ones." In my work as a software engineer, I found that lesson to be quite beneficial. After getting married, Emily and I bought a modest house around 20 minutes from my parents' place. Dad helped us with the down payment, but he demanded that we take out the mortgage in our names. He said that you must establish your own credit history. It's about taking charge of your life. While he worked on our restoration, he showed me how to patch drywall and install ceiling fans. Even in those days, he was preparing me for the duties of house ownership on the weekends. My career was really taking off at this point. I was recently promoted to team lead, where I was in charge of a group developing cloud infrastructure solutions. Despite the long hours and intense hardship, I relished every moment of it. Dad would often call during my lunch breaks to see how I was doing without really talking about anything. He understood the pressures of leading a team and supervising others' work. "Don't forget to assign. You can't do it all by yourself," he would remark, "just as I can't construct a home by myself." We were talking about the prospect of establishing a family when Dad first said that he was often tired. Mom insisted that he was working too hard, but he persisted in delaying visiting a doctor. He would brush our concerns aside. His biggest initiative to date was a multi-million-dollar development agreement that would have set up his company for the next decade. Looking back, I wish I had pressed harder and demanded the tests sooner. Maybe things would have gone differently. The company was growing rapidly at the time. Dad had just opened a second office in Portland and was talking about expanding into historical restoration projects in the Pacific Northwest. He has a track record of modernizing old buildings' infrastructure without compromising their personality. He would advise his clients to appreciate the past while embracing the future. His passion for preservation influenced all he did, both personally and professionally. Our last serious conversation was about the Mustang. After we finished the restoration, he was talking about taking it to auto shows. He said that we ought to register for the Pacific Northwest Classic. He had a childlike gleam in his eyes. Until the very end, he kept making plans for the future, telling these kids what a true muscle vehicle looked like. Before things changed, the morning started off like any other. I was at an early meeting when my phone rang and Mom phoned. I almost didn't reply since we were having a crucial project discussion. For some reason, though, I had to go out and take it. Mom was sobbing so much that she was having difficulty talking. Dad had fainted on a building site. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. The doctor said it was a serious and unexpected heart attack. He was just 58. The weeks after Dad's death were a blur of paperwork and grief. There were many people at the funeral. Many individuals had been influenced by Dad's business and community activity. Suppliers, contractors, and even competitors came to offer their support. Each person related how their father had helped them, offered guidance, or just been there for them when they needed someone to confide in. One elderly craftsman told me how his father had kept him employed, even though he was unable to work due to a long-term sickness. "Your father knew that people came first in business." He said the company's employees were devastated. Dad had known several of them for decades, and they told me stories I had never heard before, such as how he had helped one foreman through a divorce, paid for one foreman's daughter's college textbooks, or stayed late to teach apprentices the subtleties of historical restoration using photographs and handwritten comments from both clients and staff. An unauthorized monument was created out of the meeting room at work. All of us were taken aback by how thoroughly Dad had planned for everything. A week after the funeral, we were called in for a meeting by his lawyer, Mr. Anderson. He produced this huge accordion file, carefully scrawled by Dad, that said Family Security Protocol. Inside were dozens of meticulously organized documents that contained detailed directions for different parts of his property. Mr. Anderson took me on a 3-day tour of Dad's estate documents. In addition to legal documents, each color-coded container included personal notes detailing his decisions. In my 35 years of work, I have never seen an estate plan this comprehensive. It even has a 5-year company transition plan with contingency measures for different situations, Mr. Anderson said. Mom then started attending the grieving support group at her church. It was around 8 a.m. when she first met Steve there. At first, she spoke about him merely in passing. Steve recommended this excellent book about healing, or as Steve put it, feeling this way is common. He had lost his wife to cancer 2 years prior and was one of the group facilitators. I was glad she was getting help, even though it felt a bit early. Emily reminded me that everyone's grieving process is different. The church grief support group gathered every Tuesday night. Soon, Mom and Steve were going to church events more frequently. Coffee meetings evolved into lunch meetings, which eventually evolved into dinner dates after services. At a family gathering, our family friends started to worry about how fast their friendship was growing. Concerned that Mom was rushing into activities to compensate for Dad's absence, my Aunt Jane called me aside. The changes in Mom were increasingly noticeable. She got a new haircut. She began to change her appearance, and she even threw out the garden that her father had helped her design. She would always react when I asked about these developments. Time for a new beginning. The woman who used to spend hours telling him about her life hardly spoke of Dad. None of us expected it to go as fast as it did. 6 months after Dad's passing, Mom declared that Steve was moving in. His own older children, Lisa, 32, and James, 30, thought it would be helpful to revitalize the home. I tried to be kind, but it appeared like she was eager to replace all that Dad had built. Right now, I'm at a turning point. In what way can I uphold Dad's legacy without endangering Mom's prospects for happiness? Despite Emily's advice to find equilibrium, I can't help but think of Dad's letter. Keep those memories alive, son. First of all, thank you for your suggestions on my earlier essay. I regret for keeping you waiting for the update. Since my last post, which was 3 months ago, things have become considerably worse. I used to be annoyed by Steve's controlling behavior, but nowadays he acts as if he owns the house. My dad left me. Last month, Steve decided to start a major repair project without even consulting me. When I came one weekend, workers were tearing down the built-in bookcases my dad had designed for the living room. Steve was standing over them and telling them to simply put all this old wood in the garbage, as if he owned the building. They were more than simply shelves, since they were the last thing my dad and I worked on together before he became sick. When I went up to him, he reacted aggressively, saying, "Look, son," with a patronizing stress on the pronoun, "this house needs to be brought into the 21st century. Your dad has really antiquated taste. By raising the property's worth, we're helping you." I reminded him that legally, I had to approve any changes. He just laughed and continued, even though Mom was clearly in agreement with him. "I reside here with your mother. We can make improvements to our house without authorization." She acknowledged that Steve is aware of these things. He's only attempting to assist the woman who once cherished those bookshelves and would decorate them for Christmas with her assortment of vintage teacups. Now they behave as if they were only occupying space. She dismissed her dad's old house maintenance plans as relics from the past when I presented them to her. There has also been a decline in the relationship with Steve's kids. James has converted his father's workshop into a CrossFit center. He repainted rooms, replaced Dad's painstakingly restored hardwood floors with contemporary vinyl planks, and staged a garage sale to sell most of Dad's tools while I was away on business. Lisa is approaching the area as if it were a personal design endeavor. Steve pulled me aside one evening after supper and said, "We should have our names on the deed since we're paying to live here. It's just, Dad's planning has fully paid for the property, so I had to explain to him that they don't have a mortgage. Their rent isn't even covered. I am responsible for paying all property taxes, insurance, and upkeep costs. Since Emma is here, Emily suggested that we cease our weekly visits. She's right. The tension in such home does no good to anyone. But Steve's confidence has only grown as a result of taking a back seat. He started making modifications more often and started sending me invoices for them, which I never authorized. Mom's sister phoned me lately and said I should be more understanding of her new life. I tried to clarify my legal responsibilities and Dad's wishes, but she just blamed me of being stuck in the past. She is delighted with Steve. "Why don't you simply let them to personalize the house?" she inquired. This week, I discovered that the growth markers that measured my height between the ages of 3 and 18 had been taken off of the doorframe in the kitchen. Dad used to measure me on my birthday and write the date next to each mark. It's only an outdated doorframe. Just because your father touched a piece of wood doesn't mean we can keep it all. When I questioned Mom about it, she said, "I now sit in my dad's old chair more often. I managed to keep the one piece of furniture in my own garage. Mr. Anderson suggests that I start thinking about long-term solutions. Although the house is legally mine, I will soon have to make some tough decisions about its future. At what point does protecting your father's legacy take precedence over playing the villain? And how can you maintain the moral high ground when your entire family is against you?" Update 2. Thank you for all of your suggestions about my earlier post. I eventually made a decision that would probably change everything because the issue has reached a breaking point. Last week, I discussed the house issue with my financial advisor. Due to the 40% increase in adjacent property values over the past 3 years, we may generate a substantial rental income sufficient to meet Emma's future college expenses. During the conversation, I realized that I had been so focused on the sentimental aspects that I had overlooked the financial consequences of letting Mom and Steve live rent-free. When I brought this up to Mom at our weekly talk, everything blew completely out of control. "You can't do this to us," she said into the phone. "We call this place home. Steve has put a lot of effort into it." I attempted to explain that I was only thinking about my options, but she wouldn't listen. She went on to discuss all the improvements they had made, completely ignoring the fact that I had never approved of these modifications. After an hour, Steve gave a call. His tone was different from his normal haughty one. He was agitated. He said, "Listen, we have established a life in this house because you are missing your father. You cannot simply in and destroy everything." When I tried to explain the financial problems, he cut me off by saying that they now have sweat equity in the property. I reminded him that I was the legal owner of the house. Dad left everything up to me for a reason. "Your dad is no longer with you," he answered. "You have to think about the living." Before making my decision the next day, I discussed it with Emily and Mr. Anderson. As I got to the residence, Steve and Mom were engaged in another renovation project. They had started tearing off the original crown molding in the dining room, which Dad had specially milled to match the historic architecture of the home. That picture strengthened my resolve. "They have 2 weeks to locate a new residence," I informed them. Mom suddenly started crying and accused me of being cruel and heartless. By arguing with me about my incapacity to toss them out on the street, Steve attempted to intimidate me. He started listing all of their local connections, such as his workplace, their church, and their friends from the area. As my father had taught me, I remained calm and steady in the face of difficult situations. "This is my property," I said. "I'm using my legal right as the owner because Dad left it to me for a reason." Steve started listing all the money they had spent on improvements as his cheeks turned red. I told him that these unauthorized changes had actually reduced the property's historical worth. The situation worsened when Lisa got home and joined the argument. Mom immediately used her pregnancy as emotional leverage. "What gives you the right to disrespect your stepsister like this? She's going to have a baby." They find Lisa's pregnancy important, but I had to explain that she is not my stepsister and that it has no bearing on my property rights. Ever since my mom's entire family united against me, there has been a constant attack of emotional manipulation. Their parents wanted to make sure Mom was safe. Her sister sobbed when she phoned. Steve's brother, a local real estate agent, left messages about the difficult rental market. Even distant relatives that I hardly know are sending me lengthy texts about family loyalty and Christian values, taking care of family. The hardest friends are those who have known me since I was a young child. People who grew up with me now express their dissatisfaction with my choices, and every phone conversation seems like a small betrayal. Some even say that I'm hurting Dad's reputation in town. The issue is that neither profit nor cruelty are involved in this. Respecting Dad's wishes and keeping the items he made are the goals here. Witnessing their deliberate destruction of all evidence of him has been painful enough. His legacy was the home. I've covered all of their costs, let them live rent-free for years, and tolerated their unauthorized modifications. At some point, enough is enough. They've got 2 weeks to think up fresh ideas. Mom keeps asking for more time, but I'm not going to give in. According to Mr. Anderson, I have been more than giving, and the law is completely on my side. In order to ensure that everything is properly documented, he is helping me create legal documentation for the notice to leave. I understand that this makes me seem like the bad guy in everyone else's story, but sometimes doing the right thing means making tough decisions even when people don't agree. My father taught me that. The third update. We are grateful for everyone's support at this difficult time. The end of everything is inevitable. As a result, this will probably be my final update. Mom and Steve had already beyond the 2-week limit that I set for them. It's been the longest 2 weeks of my life. They have involved constant emotional manipulation, guilt-tripping, and more desperate attempts to persuade me to reconsider. Mom did everything she could. She phoned every day, alternating between tears and rage. "I changed your diapers," she would remark. "I sacrificed everything for you one day." The following day, she would shout. Additionally, Steve shifted tactics, attempting to engage in dialogue rather than use coercion. He promised to start making rent payments and suggested creating a legal lease. But after what they'd done to Dad's house, I couldn't trust them to keep whatever promises we made. 3 days before the deadline, I arrived at the house to see people gathered on the front yard. Mom had recruited family members, church friends, and even some of Dad's old business associates to help. They had prepared what amounted to an intervention. which included comments about family obligations and moral commitments. For 2 hours, I listened to people berate me for being a horrible son. Mom's preacher spoke on the subject of respecting your parents. With tears in her eyes, Dad's former secretary recalled his kindness. I was even reminded of the ideals my father had tried to instill in me by my elementary school instructor. The most difficult moment was when, with Mom sobbing behind her, Lisa stood up and spoke how stress may harm her unborn child while covering her pregnant belly with her hands. I was getting glares from several of the religious women. It was an excellent lesson in emotional manipulation. However, something unexpected happened during this ambush. As I sat there listening to everyone talk about Dad, I felt a peculiar sense of calm. Individuals who had not even attended his burial now claimed to understand his wishes. Stand your ground when you know you're right, my father used to advise, and in my mind, I could practically hear his voice. I stood up and addressed the gathering. I explained how Dad had meticulously planned everything to secure his family's future and how he had built this house by himself. I showed them photos of Steve's unauthorized changes, including the historical details he destroyed by removing the exquisite craftsmanship and installing cheap, contemporary fixtures in its place. Afterward, I showed them a letter from Dad explaining why he left everything to me. As I read his statements on trust, accountability, and leaving a legacy, a few of the more senior business partners nodded. They realized that their father truly knew him. Thus, they understood. The gang dispersed shortly after that. Some appeared disapproving, but the righteous anger had diminished, and others went away without saying another word, apologizing quietly. Steve and Mom went back inside. On the morning of the deadline, I arrived with Mr. Anderson and a locksmith. I had enlisted a security firm to be on standby, but they weren't needed. There was nobody home. Steve moved the rest of their belongings into his vehicle. As he helped Lisa into his truck, Steve couldn't resist giving me one final prod, but Mom wouldn't look at me. He inquired, "Are you content with who you are? The way you've treated your mother would make your father very pleased." I didn't respond. Dad would have been aware. I am aware that he had planned for this scenario. What other motive might he have had for making his will so clear? When they were gone, I took a walk around the house. I had misjudged how serious the damage was. The original fittings that had been painted over or removed his handmade woodwork had been replaced with builder-grade materials. After spending several weekends at the workshop, everything had completely altered. Although Mr. Anderson documented everything for any legal concerns, I have no intention of seeking damages. I just want to close this chapter and focus on making the necessary corrections. They are willing to help replace the things that were removed, and several of Dad's old craftsman colleagues have already been contacted. Mom is currently residing with her sister. Most of my family members have completely ceased communicating with me, but occasionally people phone to reprimand me on social media. Though fewer people are replying to each post, Steve's kids are still sharing distressing updates about their unfortunate mother getting evicted from her house. Emily has been my rock during this whole ordeal. Every time I start to question myself, she reminds me of my father's letter, in which he expressed his confidence in my capacity to make the right decisions. Emma is too little to understand what is happening today to return the house to its original condition, but I will ultimately teach her about her grandfather and the legacy he tried to maintain. I'm working with a restoration specialist. Although it won't be flawless, we can maintain the essence of what Dad created. Certain things are irreversible. The workshop will be renovated first. I want my daughter to go to school at the same location where my father taught me. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at the cost of being the antagonist in someone else's story. I can live with the idea that I kept the things my father trusted me with, even if I may never be able to reestablish the connections I lost. As my father used to say, integrity is not about taking the easy way, but about doing the right thing, even when it hurts. I think he would understand. This will be my final update. I am grateful to everyone who has helped me along the way. I appreciate you watching. Please click the notification bell if you haven't already in order to receive updates on additional startling real-life stories that are happening in your area. Story 3. When my mother learned that I was prosperous, she wanted money for my siblings' college after kicking me out for her new family. To put things in perspective, my biological father was never involved in my birth, and I was born at the age of 20 by my mother. She told me he never wanted kids. Additionally, she gave him the choice to leave as they had only been dating for a few months when she became pregnant, and he did. She said that he had refused to pay child support and that she had decided not to pursue it from him due to the resentment of their split. It was convenient for both of them to never speak again. She was lucky to have my grandparents' consistent encouragement and support, which allowed her to complete her education and find work. While I was around 8 years old, Mother started seeing Harry, a coworker, before getting married. Mother had dated a few men while I was younger. We weren't very close, but they dated for more than 3 years. 4 years after they were married, my mom became pregnant, and Harry and I got along well enough to tolerate each other being in the house. Everyone, myself included, was ecstatic. I should have understood what was going to happen, in hindsight, but I was so focused on the notion that my mother would always be there for me. Mom had faced many difficulties raising me alone, so I prayed she wouldn't abandon me now. After she married Harry, she clearly started to separate herself from me, and we started to drift apart, but I assumed that this was only a phase, and that things would get better while she was pregnant. I tried to be supportive, but she seemed to become more irate each time I visited in order to keep me from bothering her. It appears that I wasn't discreet enough, despite my decision to become rare. 6 months after she gave birth to twins, she and Harry sat me down for a serious talk. They told me that because they had 2 kids to take care of, they couldn't keep me in the house. Since I had just turned 16 and was still considered a juvenile, they were unable to lawfully expel me without facing consequences. They tried to convince me differently by emphasizing the cost of supporting a large family on their little salary. I honestly didn't believe it was difficult to support 2 adults, 1 adolescent, and 2 children on the salaries of 2 web developers, because we had been living nicely up until that time. Obviously, they just wanted me gone. Sincerely, I didn't want to go. So even then, I tried to suggest strategies to prevent it, if finances were an issue. I proposed to get a job, but my mother claimed she preferred to keep funds and resources for the kids who were more deserving. They deserved to stay with them more than I did, she said. It's not like they needed the asterisk this much. It was clear that no one wanted me, and that was all it took for me to realize I had to go. After I left without even informing me where I was going, they had simply given me a little prod, since they understood. I had enough respect to know I was undesired. They hadn't actually expelled me, so their plan worked. Even if it wasn't an official eviction, I would still classify it as such. After they pushed me into a challenging circumstance, I felt as though I had no other option. When I left that day, I went directly to my grandparents' house. Despite their displeasure with my mother's actions, they didn't interrupt her because they wanted to be present for the twins. I started working part-time when I was 16 since my grandparents were getting too old to support me financially. I occasionally saw my grandparents when my mom and Harry took the kids to see them, but they seldom ever asked how I was doing. They tended to be quite formal, as though they were completely unaffected by my absence, even after they noticed me. In fact, they seemed content without me around. My mother seemed to be less irritable, which disappointed me, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it until college time. My grandparents were my housemates. My grandparents weren't old enough or healthy enough to help me get established in my dorm, so I had to rely on friends to help me get comfortable, because my mom wasn't connected with me even then. In order to save money for the baby's future, my mother and Harry declined. One of my cousins co-signed for the student loan that I had to take out. Luckily, one of my uncles agreed to help if I promised him that he would never have to pay for it. To ensure that I wouldn't fall behind on my payments, and to give myself a financial edge, I worked while I was in college. After I entered college, my mother and I didn't talk much, and my graduation was attended exclusively by my grandparents. My mother didn't even try to congratulate me, in order to save my elderly grandparents from feeling burdened. After graduating from college, I started working and living on my own. Even so, I didn't earn a lot of money in the beginning. In addition to paying for groceries, electricity, and rent, I was also beginning to pay down my debt and save money for the future. Actually, I would characterize that asterisk as having a low income. Thankfully, things improved at last. I ultimately advanced through my organization's ranks, but it took some time, considering how little help I really got. I'm pleased with my progress and am now in a more relaxed position. Despite the fact that we haven't spoken in years, my mother was surprised to learn that I make a solid living. I started my career at the same company 4 months ago, and I am today in a senior management position at the age of 33. Only a few people were aware of my huge advancement, since I wanted to keep it a secret. I did let my uncle know, as I understand it, to thank him for co-signing my loan back when I was struggling to pay for college. Even while I'm sure he meant well, he recently met my mom and Harry at a family gathering and encouraged her to contact me to congratulate me on my accomplishment. Because she didn't even contact me to congratulate me, it didn't work out. Harry insisted on speaking to me on a recent visit to my house when my mother eventually found out about it. I should mention that since I entered college, I haven't spoken to her. After graduating, I cut her out of my life and blocked her everywhere. I hope she would change her mind since I didn't see any use in it. She didn't seem to be affected, and I doubt she even realized, to be honest. The only people that interacted with me were my grandparents, who knew that I didn't like talking about my mother and avoided the topic. My mom and Harry had been struggling financially for a few years, but I didn't really keep in touch with my uncle either. I didn't know until they came to my door and informed me how horrible things had gotten. I only let them inside because I hoped they would come to make apologies, but that was wishful thinking. They started out by saying they had heard from my uncle about my promotion and how I was one of the youngest people in my company, holding such a high position. Instead, they congratulated me on my achievement. They were shocked that I had withheld it from them. Ironically, I was surprised that they expected me to get in touch with them at all, much alone, share any good news. They also expressed disappointment that I had excluded them from my life, saying that it was only because they had put their kids before me. They insisted that as a teenager, I should have been mature enough to understand their reordered priorities and not be bitter. They suggested that instead of moving home with my grandparents, I ought to have backed their choices. I have no idea why they believed that I would support their decision to kick me out of the house. They made an effort to make me believe that I was the villain, because I was upset that they had kicked me out so they could be alone with their kids. But after all these years, that's how they started our reunion. Without even giving me an opportunity to present my side of the story, they talked about how difficult the last several years had been for them. They talked about how they had started their own business, but unfortunately, it failed, and they lost money. Now that the twins were approaching college age, they were trying to make up for past losses and were in dire need of money. That's when I realized why they had come. They required financial support. They wasted little time in getting straight to the point, even attempting to lighten it by saying that I could compensate them by covering my brother's tuition. But initially they were angry that I hadn't been in touch with them, despite my good performance. By letting me pay for 2 children's college educations, they tried to give the impression that they were doing me a favor. It shocked me that I didn't know anymore. Immediately, I informed them that I would not be doing that and that it was impolite of them to think they could force me to do so. They wanted to save for their actual children, who they felt deserved it more than I did. So I became angry and reminded them that they were the reason I had to work while in college and pay for my own education. At the time, they had declined to help me financially. I told them that since I had never questioned their decision to prioritize the twins and had just left them alone, they had no right to demand anything from me now, especially financial help. In fact, they were no longer entitled to insist that I speak with them. I pointed out that they could now use the same money to cover the twins' college expenses since they had wanted to save funds and resources for the kids who deserved them, rather than trying to manipulate me emotionally. I begged them to go as I was at a loss for words. They were agitated and tried to shift the responsibility elsewhere because I foolishly invited them into my house in the first place, thinking they could have come to apologize for how they treated me. They told me that I wasn't innocent in this case, their protection, as I started to demand that they go. I was overly eager, they remarked. When we all lived together, she was too interested and often irritated. When I was just a teenager, I was attempting to stay in contact with my family as they grew apart. I thus found it hard to accept that was a real problem. They were with me. Then, because I had turned down their request, they had the gall to say that I was no better than them. They said that I was losing sight of the years my mother had raised me by herself and provided for me. I was being impolite and unappreciative, but they said that this was my chance to make amends to her and a sister. As a youngster at the time, I found it ridiculous that even if I had wanted to, they would bring it up. I couldn't have made the decision to not depend on them. And it wasn't as if they were assisting me. They essentially forced me out of the house by pushing me out, as soon as they thought I was old enough to handle things independently. Over the next 18 years, they wouldn't accept that I existed. Even after everything that had transpired during the argument, I was still astounded that they had the audacity to ask me to help them now, as if I owed them something. I eventually threatened to call the police if they didn't leave my property, since things had gotten so personal and unpleasant. Before they eventually left after more disputes, my mother reminded me of all the sacrifices she had made when I was younger, supposedly because she wanted to be a good mother. She said that the one time she had expected me to understand her situation and let her put other people before herself, I had been unappreciative. She now asserted that I was making her the antagonist, not the other way around. This has been with me ever since, and I'm struggling to determine if I'm to blame, if I've been expecting too much from my mother, or if she's just lying to me. Even though I'm very convinced I'm right, I choose to post on Reddit to seek some objective viewpoints. Right, for not covering my half-sibling's education expenses, because my stepfather and estranged mother are struggling financially. I informed my uncle that what he did was wrong and unacceptable, despite his good intentions. Undoubtedly, his actions had a detrimental impact. If he hadn't told my mother about me and given my contact information without my permission, I wouldn't be in this situation. He apologized profusely, saying he didn't know they were having financial problems and that he didn't know my mother would react this way. He acknowledged that he had no right to tell my mother about my life and that we would have gotten back together on our own if we had desired to. I don't plan on removing him from my life because his heart was in the right place. If he had meant something else, I would have been far more upset. He just made a mistake. He also made it possible for me to go to college in the first place. The only individual willing to take on the duty of co-signing my loan application was him. If you think about it, if it weren't for him, I might not be in this predicament at all. Since I don't want to come out as unappreciative, but I'm also not a doormat, I made sure to let him know that what he did wasn't suitable. I think I struck the perfect balance, and whatever I did was fair enough. I won't hold anything against him since I somehow needed this resolution, and we're doing well together. I also talked to my grandparents about my mom's recent difficulties. They think I'm right, and they've said they'll try to convince her to reconsider. I came to understand that they have kept in touch with my mom because they didn't want to lose contact with their other grandkids. They don't think it's fair or proper to put me through this, even though they appreciate the difficulties my mom's family is facing. That's their stance on the matter, and I think it makes sense. Asterisk. The initial update. My mom has made it her mission to remind me of all she'd done for me as a child. Almost 9 days have passed since our previous conversation. She undoubtedly tries to make me feel like I owe her something by sending me an email every other day. I don't really get the purpose because she was legally obligated to care for me, and it's not like she did me a favor by raising me alone. I was only raised by her when it suited her. As soon as I began to cause them problems, she and her husband made the decision to evict me, citing the necessity of setting up funds for the twins' future. Instead of spending time attempting to control and guilt trip me, I think the twins should rely on themselves now that we are in the future and they are grown-ups. A few days ago, I decided to respond to her emails even though I had been ignoring them. I went over what I had written in my essay with her. She called me ungrateful because she didn't take it well. Again, she had been a horrible mother. So I told her that calling me names would not change the fact and that I no longer wanted to communicate with her. Since she never did the same for me, she created a new email address to continue annoying me after I banned her old one. That one too, I blocked, and I will continue to do so until she realizes that I am not here to whine about her. Since I was still holding out hope that maybe they had changed, that maybe they were here to congratulate me and make apologies, I must admit that I'm delighted we're finally having this conversation because I think it will go swiftly and I'll get the closure I need. Did I greet them and speak with them that day at my home? But after talking to them, I understood that they just aren't the kind of people who can feel remorse, guilt, or shame. After realizing once more how conceited and crafty they are, I gave up on ever mending our relationship. Second update, I think my mother did the most strange thing she has ever done when she showed up at my workplace earlier today. Luckily, I wasn't working today, so she left quickly and her attempt was unsuccessful. I chose to take the day off since I was feeling a little under the weather, and I'm glad I did. If I had been there, she would have undoubtedly lost her temper or done something to make me seem stupid. When the receptionist phoned to let me know that my mother had come, she wanted to see me but wouldn't go, even after I told her I wasn't there. When they put her on the phone with me, I found out the truth. I was already a little nervous about what she would do, but I assured her firmly that I was at home. She was told that I would sue her until she was too embarrassed to send her kids to college if she tried anything at my workplace. I think that really scared her since I tried my hardest to sound menacing. It must have worked since she agreed to leave immediately if I met her in person. I told her that she wasn't in a position to be making demands and reminded her that she couldn't afford a lawsuit right now. I added that if things got worse, my employer would not hesitate to sue her, which would be a very different issue because they wouldn't be as understanding as I had been. She would be better off leaving quietly. I assume she left after returning the phone to the receptionist because I didn't receive any additional calls or notifications about the event. That was definitely a close call, and I can't afford for it to happen again. To find out what safeguards I may take, I have decided to consult a lawyer. I'm not sure if this is sufficient to obtain a restraining order because she hasn't made any outright threats. However, I still want to talk about my options with the lawyer. I just hope that this experience was bad enough for her to consider ignoring me till after it's over. Update 3. I guess I don't need to think about requesting a restraining order because I'm certain we now have grounds for one. I was successful in convincing my mother to go when she showed up at my workplace last week. But with everything that happened this week, I think that everyone deserves a restraining order against her. A few days ago, when I came home from work, she was waiting outside my door. I told her straight immediately that I didn't want to argue and that if she didn't leave, I would call the police. I was about to dial when she virtually ran at me and shoved me to the ground, causing my phone to fly out of my hands. She tried to beat me up while cursing at me and accusing me of being responsible for all the bad things that had happened in her life. I was so shocked by her crazy behavior that it took me some time to respond. But since I'm younger than her and I work out regularly, it was easy for me to overwhelm her when I did. Luckily, my neighbors were aware of the issue and called the police as a result of all the yelling. They even helped me by holding my mother while we waited for the police to arrive. When the cops finally showed there, I decided to press charges. She's in a lot of difficulty right now. I've also spoken with my lawyer about this and asked for a restraining order against her. I've been told that Harry moved in with his parents after taking the kids. I don't know if he plans to return anytime soon. After saving her, he reportedly confronted her about her actions and told her that she couldn't keep acting in this way. Additionally, she and he got into a fight, which suggests that she has truly lost it. In all honesty, she is responsible for her own problems, but I think she finds it hard to accept that I'm doing well in life. I'm not going to feel sorry for her. The restraining order will be in effect shortly, and I've already begun to consider moving into a bigger house now that I'm earning more money. I'm going to start looking into my options because this seems like the best time. I genuinely hope my mother gets the help she needs and learns to act normally, because it is embarrassing to be associated with someone like that. My grandparents have told me they no longer want to be around her because of the nasty things she has done to them. She is the only one responsible for everyone avoiding her. In any case, it no longer worries me. I appreciate you watching. Please click the notification bell if you haven't already, in order to receive updates on additional startling real-life stories that are happening in your area.